Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are doing a deck tech for Kotori Pilot Prodigy. Kotori is a 3-mana 2/4 Moonfolk pilot with vehicles you control have crew 2. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target artifact creature you control gains lifelink and vigilance, and guess what? That creature is going to be a vehicle, and this is Azorius vehicles. So why play Kotori? I think Kotori has the best color access to vehicles just in general, and also really good artifact support. So I think that kind of combo makes Kotori the ideal vehicle commander. And crew 2 for every vehicle makes it extremely easy to get them up and moving. You'll have a lot of these vehicles that have like crew 6, crew 5, and it's like I don't want to have to invest all of those creatures to make that happen. But Kotori just makes all the vehicles have crew 2. Kotori as a 2/2 can crew any vehicle herself, which is also really good, and it makes it so our other more utility guys can help also crew up vehicles. Also, vehicles getting lifelink and vigilant is a really good way to keep us in the game longer, and the vigilance makes it so that they are great blockers. So in this scenario, the idea is we just pick a vehicle, the biggest one we can, we animate it, we give it lifelink, and then we can gain a lot of life, and then since it's still untapped, we can use it as a great blocker on the crackback. And the main reason for building this deck list, despite it coming out, this card came out in 2022, so although I'm making this deck list 3 years later, Aetherdrift gave us so many new vehicles and vehicle support that I wanted to make a vehicle deck. However, I don't really think that any of the vehicle commanders from Aetherdrift are as good as Kotori, so I decided just to pick her and add a lot of new cards from the new set. So here's the game plan, right? We don't need her to win, but she really does help get our vehicles up, right? Like, we can win without her, but I'll be honest, right? At like the combat, giving something vigilance on lifelink, yeah, it's great. Honestly, we could take her or leave it, right? The real reason you run Kotori is so vehicles you control have crew 2. That's what we want, and we can still make our vehicles happen without her, but it's just like it's basically a big cost reducer almost. So in the early game, we want to drop 1 or 2 CMC rocks, small creatures that can crew, and we have a few like 1-drop vehicles. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But then mid-game, we play Kotori around turn 4 or 5. We really don't want to play her on curve just because we want to make sure that we have enough vehicles on the field that we can then just basically crew up instantly and they can attack. You don't need haste to crew. You don't. You need haste to attack, but you just tap it. And then late game, we just get these massive artifacts with cool abilities and we just beat down. Some channel and deck stuff. The deck is about $325 at the making of the video, which is pretty cheap, I think. As always, you can cut like Ristic Study, you'll see later. Save yourself like $40 on that, no big deal. Get the cards you need from the link down below, and as always, like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Let's go into it. The only Planeswalker we run in the deck is Tez the Seeker. The main reason we're running Tez is for his -X. Search your library for an artifact card with CMC X or less and put it onto the battlefield. So it's really just a hard tutor of a vehicle or whatever to the field that costs 4 or less. And ideally, we want to do something that costs 3 or less just so we can have him live. So then next turn we can untap 2 artifacts. Untapping 2 artifacts is really good because we can crew down some things, which is really nice. It could be a little bit of ramp because we have a lot of mana rocks. It could be a lot of things, right? We could tap, crew, untap an artifact creature, crew it again. Post-combat, we can untap a vehicle, block with it, whatever, right? We can do a lot of stuff. If we can ult him, his ult is realistic, right? If we drop him on turn 5 or earlier, and then we just plus him for whatever reason, like his -5 will very real kill people, right? Like making everything we have, because we're an artifact deck, right? Making all of our things 5/5s is massive. Going into creatures, we have Cloudspire Captain. Mounts and vehicles you control get +1/+1. I will say that we do not have any mounts. No mounts, just vehicles. And then it has the whole pilot thing that it can crew vehicles as if the power were 2 or greater. Cyberdrive Awakener is really a win the game card. Flying, other artifact creatures you control have flying. When it enters the battlefield, animate all of our artifacts into 4/4s that now have flying. It quote-unquote crews all of our vehicles. So basically, we just swing out in the air, ideally kill someone. Emery, Lurker, and the Lock doesn't really care about cards that much, but boy, does she like getting them out of lakes. Mill 4 cards when she enters. Choose an artifact card from a graveyard. If like a vehicle dies or whatever, just bring it back to we can just cast it again. It's good recursion. Ethereum Sculptor and Founding Inspector are functionally the same. Artifact spells cost 1 less, which is really good because we're mostly an artifact deck. Founding Inspector I do like a little bit more. Although he costs 1 more mana, he is a 3/2, which means he can crew a lot of vehicles. Kappa Cannoneer has Improvise, so it never really costs 6, and Ward 4, which might as well say Hexproof. When an artifact enters the battlefield under our control, put a 1/1 counter on it, and it can't be blocked. It also counts itself, so it enters as a 5/5 unblockable, but without haste. So this isn't really for the vehicle plan, this is more for the we're an artifact deck plan, and this is going to be like a 7/7 unblockable hexproof, which is really good. Katsumasa the Animator, flying, pay 3 mana, basically choose one of your vehicles and animate it. That's pretty much it. Like, you can animate a non-vehicle, but kind of why would you? And then at the beginning of your upkeep, put 3 1/1 counters on up to 3 target non-creature artifacts. So really, we just put 3 counters on our best vehicle. Lita, Mechanical Engineer, has Vigilance at the beginning of your end step. Untap each other artifact you control, and then we can pay 4 and tap it to make a 5/5 blimp. With crew 3, and that's pretty solid. We're really good. We really like her because, one, we have a lot of artifact creatures, vehicles are kind of our bread and butter, and it's also really, really nice that we just can kind of crew without worrying, right? One of the issues with vehicle decks is you have to constantly tap down everything, just so you can animate these bigger attackers, but then your kind of shields down. So Lita's at least really nice in the fact that we can now just untap all of our artifact creatures, and we do have a lot of them. Lochiel, Clockwork Scholar, prevent all combat damage will be dealt to attacking artifacts, so we can swing in with our vehicles and not have to worry about them dying. And then whenever one or more artifact creatures enters the battlefield, we draw a card. Only once a turn, but still passive, a little bit passive card draw. Medicant Core Guidelight, very cool. I love these little robot guys. So his power is equal to the number of artifacts we control. So at the very worst, since he is an artifact, he's a 1/3 for 2 mana. He has Start Your Engines, which is a brand new keyword from Aether Drift. If you have no speed, it starts at 1. It increases once on each of your turns when an opponent loses life, and the max speed is 4. So it just kind of gets progressively bigger and bigger. And then after like 4 turns of dealing damage, I guess 3 turns of dealing damage because he starts with 1. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you pay 1, and if you do, copy it. He's good in both aspects of vehicles and just an artifact deck. Like, we are an artifact deck early game. He's like a 2 mana 3/3. Late and with, Start Your Engine, so we can just kind of build incrementally. And then late game, if it's like too late, forget max speed, he's now like a 12/3 for like 2 mana, which is also a very real threat. Mu Yanlin, Wind Rider, just kind of, I like these like build down cards. When it enters, make a 3/2 vehicle. Vehicles have flying, and then whenever more creatures you control with flying deal combat damage to a player, draw a card, which is really nice. Gives all of our vehicles evasion, it makes a vehicle on entry, and it gives us a lot of card draw, which is really good. Padim, Consul of Innovation, he's alright, right? Like, artifacts you control have hexproof, which is really good because we're an artifact deck, and we really like that. We don't want our vehicles getting blown up. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control an artifact with the highest mana value or tied for the highest CMC, draw a card. So he does keep our guys safe. He's a fine blocker as a 1/4. And then sometimes he draws us cards, which isn't bad. It's just like, I don't know. Maybe he's not the best include, but I think he's good enough to keep him in. Sai, Master Thopterist. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, make a 1/1 Thopter with flying, and then pay 2, sacrifice 2 artifacts, draw a card. The reason I like Sai, and here's the idea I have with him, right, is you cast a vehicle or an artifact and it outbrings in a 1/1, and you can, like, if you get 2 1/1s, since most of our vehicles are going to have crew 2 anyways, with our commander on the field, we just start tapping those Thopters and crewing up vehicles rather than like using Sai, for example, to crew. Samwell is really great. He's literally built for crewing. As long as an artifact creature you control is attacking and prevent all damage that'll be dealt to him, you can kind of ignore that. His real ability is whenever he becomes tapped, exile the top 6 cards of our deck, and we then cast a vehicle or artifact spell from among them, and put the rest on the bottom. So it's just kind of, we go 6 deep, and if we find an artifact or a vehicle, we can just cast it post main phase 2. SRAM. Ignore everything else. Whenever you cast a vehicle, draw a card. No auras, no equipments, just cars. Tashar, Ancestor's Apostle. Whenever you cast a historic spell, return target creature card with CMC 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And historics are artifacts, which is most of our deck. Legendaries, which we have a good chunk of, as you can see on this page. And sagas, we have no sagas. So the idea is like we have cards like Unctus die or whatever, and that's like we're like, okay, well we cast like a vehicle and now Unctus is back on the field because we have a lot of smaller dudes. Unctus is really good. Thanks, Unk. Other blue creatures you control have, whenever this becomes tapped, draw a card and discard a card, and other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1, and then you can pay 2 life or 1 mana until end of turn. Target creature you control is a blue artifact, only as a sorcery. He's really good because when we're just tapping down our blue creatures, they loot, and we're tapping them because we're accruing them, so it kind of works out. And he gives all our vehicles +1/+1, and he can just make something a vehicle, which is kind of nice. So imagine when you have like Sai or Padim that are like 1/4s, and they're like, okay, well, one isn't really going to hit that crew 2, but you can pay like a mana or 2 life and be like, oh yeah, Sai's now like a 2/5 because he's now an artifact creature, and now we can crew whatever, which is also kind of a little added benefit. Thanks, Unk. Urza, Prince of Krug, artifact creatures you control get bigger, which is great, and then we can pay 6 mana to make a copy of an artifact we control, except it's a 1/1. This is more or less just like good like utility in my head, right? It's like we want to get like a good ETB, like we want to get more value rather than like a big beater. So just 6 mana instant speed, make a copy that's now functionally a 3/3 is great. And then finally we have Vidalcan Engineer. Add 2 mana of any one color, spend it only to cast artifacts or activate artifact abilities. That's great. He's like a super mana door just for artifacts, and there's not a ton of ramp in Azorius. Going into sorceries, we have Anchor to Reality. As an additional cost to cast it, sacrifice an artifact or a creature, search your deck for your vehicle, put it on the field. That's really it. If it has mana value less than the sacrifice permanent, it won't scry 2. It won't. Like, ideally, we're sacrificing like a Thopter or whatever, and we're getting like our best car onto the field. Dance of the Manse. Good no matter how you do it, right? If you want to go like, I don't know, like X's3, return 3 artifacts from our grave to the field, which is great. Or if you want to go nuts and do X's6, then all of those permanents are 4/4s in addition to their other types, so they're just permanently like animated, which is really good for vehicles because we no longer have to crew them. Organic Extinction, improvise so it never costs 10, destroy all non-artifact creatures. Pretty good. Really just like, I like the idea of, I mean, it's a board wipe, right? That hits most of our opponent's stuff, and it dodges most of ours. That's kind of it. And then finally, we have Tune Up for sorceries. Return target artifact cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. If it's a vehicle, it's just an artifact creature. Forever. Not until end of turn. Just forever. Kind of like Dance of the Manse. It's really good. So it's like Tune Up is a quick reanimate, and now it's just like a creature forever. Like, we don't have to crew it anymore. Going into instance, we have Armed and Armored. Vehicles you control become artifact creatures until end of turn. Ignore the bottom ability. It's not relevant. It's really good if we want to do like a big attack and we don't like, have a lot of creatures, or we can swing with all of our creatures and we can swing with all of our vehicles. Or if someone swings into us, it's a good kind of combat trick where we can animate all of our vehicles and just have like a big block. Counterspell, get rid of something we don't like. Dawn's Truce is really there if someone tries to kill Kotori or wipe our board or whatever. Just giving everything like hexproof and indestructible for 2 mana in a card draw is a good rate. Desynchronization is an absolute all-star in this deck. Return each non-land permanent that's not historic to its owner's hand. Artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic. So the idea is with this is that we're just bouncing a lot of our stuff, like all of our opponent's stuff, like because we have a good amount of legendaries, we have a good, like most of our deck is artifacts, so basically the idea is most of our stuff sticks around and most of our opponent's stuff is back in their hand. That's the idea. Dispatch, tap target creature for 1 mana. That card sucks. But if we have Metalcraft and 3 or more artifacts, we exile a creature, which is way better, and I also love Liberty Prime. I think he's so cool. Dovin's Veto is an uncounterable negate. Very cool. Thanks, Dovin. And then finally, we have Generous Gift. To pop target permanent, its controller creates a 3/3 green elephant creature token. Just get rid of something we don't like, they can have a 3/3. The thing I hate about this card, and I hate it so much, is that it's a green elephant, and it's not a white elephant. Like, there's no reason why it can't be a white elephant. I digress. Going into artifacts, the big bulk of the deck. Aerial Surveyor. Flying, whenever it attacks, if defending player controls more lands than you, search your library for a basic plains card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. And crew 2. Now, for all the crews, I'm not really going to mention the crews too much, because the idea is if we have Kotori on the field, all of the crews are 2, right? So when every crew is two, like it's kind of not really worth pointing out. But Aerial Survivor is like a great example of like the reason why we play Kotori on like turn 4 or 5. So when we play like Aerial Surveyor on turn 3 or whatever, and then play Kotori on turn 4, like we can skip that land drop and then attack a player and then tutor up a basic and then play our land for turn that way, so we can just kind of ramp. So making sure our vehicles can attack is really good. Arcane Signet and Azorius Signet, they're just rocks. We don't really have land ramp in Azorius, so rocks are the best we're going to get. Colossal Plow and Consulate Dreadnought are really good examples of vehicles we want to get down turn 1 or 2, right? So Colossal Plow is like when it attacks, we get 3 mana and gain 3 life, and it has the whole mana doesn't end. And Consulate Dreadnought is just like a 7/11 for 1, and Colossal Plow is a 6/3. The idea is we play these guys on like turn 1 or 2, and then like with these guys, we can play Kotori on turn 3, so we curve out exactly. And then like we attack with a 7/11 on turn 3, or we attack with a 6/3 that now generates us 3 mana, so we can cast something else, we can gain 3 life. So these are the kind of cards we want to see early game, and even late game, they're like still not bad. Deluxe Dragster is basically unblockable, and when it deals combat damage to a player, we may cast an instant or sorcery from their graveyard without paying their mana cost. Really, really good, just because it's functionally unblockable, because no one's really running cars other than us. And it can be a lot of different things. Like, this is kind of like the unpredictable card. It could be ramp, it could be an extra turn, it could be a board wipe, it could be whatever. Detention Chariot. New card, 6 mana, 6/6. When it enters, exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls until it leaves. Crew 3, and then cycling for a plains. The way I look at this card is, we get it early game, get rid of it. Like, just cycle it. We have a good amount of like the reanimate from our grave, which is fine. Like, we have a couple cards with cycling. Play them later, right? Or late game, just hard cast it. It's a 6/6 for 6 that is basically Fiend Hunter, and honestly, I don't think that snake's going to be that fast enough to like win a race. Then we have Guidelight Pathmaker, really cool card. Vigilance 6/5. When it enters, search your deck for an artifact card and then just put it on the field if its mana value is 2 or less. Otherwise, put it into our hand. So it's a hard tutor to our hand, or sorry, a hard tutor to the field for 2 or less, or it's a hard tutor to our hand. And like, here's like the gripe, right? Like, you're telling me that snake is going to be as fast as Guidelight Pathmaker? Like, look at those two vehicles, right? Not even comparable in speed. Imposter Mech is just super sick. You may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature an opponent controls, except it's a vehicle, and that's pretty much it. It just enters as a clone as a copy an opponent controls, and it has crew 3, which is really crew 2. So we just get the best thing on their field, which is really, really good. Mech Titan Core, I love this card. I love this card when they showed it. 5 mana. Exile it at instant speed. Exile it at instant speed and 4 other artifact creatures and or vehicles you control to create Mech Titan, a legendary 10/10 artifact creature token with Flying, Vigilance, Trample, Lifelink, and Haste. That's all colors. And then, when that token leaves the battlefield, return all cards exiled with Mech Titan Core, except Mech Titan Core, to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. So basically the way it works, right, is we can just pay 5 mana to get a big scary 10/10 and exile a couple other like artifacts, and that's it. And then when that token dies, we get everything else back but Mech Titan Core, right? So here's the way you can look at it. You can do it to get a big scary 10/10 that can beat down really quick, or what we can do if someone like wants to wipe the board, we can say 5 mana, exile Mech Titan Core, we get the 10/10. The 10/10 dies, we get everything else back. We lose Mech Titan Core, but on the contrary, we lose everything else. Mobilizer Mech is just kind of a buy one, get one free, because when it becomes crew, we just animate another vehicle, which is really good. Nautiloid Ship is super sick. When it enters the battlefield, just exile target player's graveyard, and then when it deals combat damage to a player, you may put a card exiled with it onto the battlefield under our control. So it's kind of good, I would say, a bit later in the game, right? Just a bit later in the game, we want to make sure yards are full, because we're probably not getting anything too spectacular early game. I mean, either way, right? Like, even if you get like 1 or 2 creatures, like, it's really good. It's a great guy. And it's a flying 5/5. Like, have fun blocking that. Parhelion 2, flying, first strike, vigilance. When it attacks, create 2 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance that are also attacking, and crew 4, which is really crew 2. 8 mana 5/5, that's a rough rate, but it's really not when you consider everything you get. Plus, we have a little bit of like the reanimate if we put it in the graveyard. I mean, hard casting is still possible with like some of our cost reducers or whatever, but Parhelion is definitely one of the big stinks that when it hits the field is definitely like game affecting. Peace Walker Colossus, 6/6 for 3 mana, pay 3 mana to animate another vehicle. It's great. It's a 2 mana animate a vehicle instead of crewing it. Possession Engine, super cool card. I love how like all of like the demon dudes from Valgavoth's crew are just like shredding on guitars. I think that's epic. When it enters, gain control of target creature and opponent controls for as long as you control the vehicle. That creature can't attack or block for as long as you control it. However, it can for sure crew the vehicle, which is pretty neat. Prodigy's prototype is just a really good vehicle. Whenever one or more vehicles you control attack, create a 1/1 pilot with the whole pilot thing. Oh, the whole pilot thing is basically this creature crews vehicles as though its power were 2 greater, so it can crew vehicles although its power was 3. So the 1/1 pilots can crew 3, right? And it has crew 2, but it doesn't really matter too much because all of our crews are ideally 2. Repurposing Bay is just kind of like a pod. Pay 2 mana and sacrifice another artifact to search your deck for an artifact with mana value 1+ equal to the sacked ones, and then put it on the battlefield, and then do it only as an sorcery, which is fine. It's pretty good. I mean, like, you can turn Prodigy's prototype into Shurikai, Genesis Engine, so things like that are really good, especially like if we have like some of like our low costed artifacts where it's like, okay, well, this thing's not really doing too much work anymore. I'd rather get a 4 mana guy out. Shurikai Genesis Engine, 1 mana for an 8/8 for 4. Pay 1, tap it, draw 2, discard a card, create a 1/1 pilot with the whole pilot thing. It has crew 8, which is really crew 2, and it can be your commander, which isn't super really relevant. I mean, it can be. Honestly, like, I feel like Kotori and Shurikai are pretty interchangeable as commanders in this deck. I think Kotori is a little bit better because that's kind of the focus of it, but I mean, like, you could get away with both. Either way, it's a big beater or it's a card draw engine. Literally a Genesis engine. Simulacrum Synthesizer. That's the only time I'm going to pronounce that correctly. When it enters, scry 2. Great. Whenever another artifact with mana value 3 or greater enters the battlefield under our control, make a construct with the whole +1/+1 for each artifact you control. The way I like this card, right, is kind of the same logic as Sai, where you cast a big artifact, it comes in with a guy, right? And that guy's almost always going to be able to crew. So let's use Sky Sovereign as an example, right? Let's say turn whatever, we play the Simulacrum Synthesizer. I can't say it without like going slow. And then we have Sky Sovereign. So let's say we have Simulacrum on the field, and then we cast Sky Sovereign. We now make a 0/0, which now has power 3/3. At the very worst, it's a 3/3 because now we have 3 artifacts on the field counting itself, and we can use that 3 to then crew the Sky Sovereign. So that's kind of the idea. And then eventually when we get so many more artifacts, it's like, okay, well, I just cast like Sky Sovereign or another 3 mana artifact, and now I got like this free 10/10 or whatever. So they're not crewing at that point. They're attacking at that point. Sky Sovereign's great. Just when it enters or attacks, it deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. Just good removal, just to zap some things. Smuggler's Copter, the Looter's Scooter. When it attacks, loot. Literally draw. You may draw a card when it attacks or blocks. If you do, discard a card. Great. Crew 1, easy. Soul Ring is Soul Ring. Talisman of Progress is really just, again, so like we just don't have a lot of mana ramp. Like we only have rocks in this deck, so it's kind of the best we can do. The Indomitable is super sick. Trample 6/6 when it deals combat damage to a player. Draw a card, crew 3. And then as long as we control, forget the pirates, 3 or more tapped vehicles, we can cast it from our grave. So it never really goes away, and also we can just like draw a bunch of cards, which is really good. Thopter Fabricator is really good for drawing multiple cards every turn. So we have, whenever you draw your second card, create a 1/1 Thopter. And we can crew it, and it's just a big beater. So this is really nice when we have like all of those effects. It's basically like effects that let us draw more than like one card, right? Like 1 card addition to the one we draw on our turn, or we have cards like Shurikai Genesis Engine that draws 2 cards and then discard a card. So it's like we could do that at instant speed. It's just good to make out like dudes that are like there for blocking. Unidentified Hover Shift. It's basically Fiend Hunter. Exile up to 1 target creature with toughness 5 or less. It's Fiend Hunter as a vehicle. It's good. It's good. Unlicensed Hearse is one of the ways we really deal with Grave Hate. Like, yeah, we have Nautilus Ship, but this is like our Grave Hate, right? Exile up to 2 target cards from a single graveyard, and then its power toughness are equal to the number of cards exiled with it. This kind of card, right, is we're not really crewing it. Like, we're not crewing it often. Like, it's there to exist to tap and eat players' graveyards, and then eventually eventually, right, we're like, yeah, this thing's like a 10-10, and then we start crashing in. Valor's flagship, flying first strike lifelink with cycling X and 3. Whenever you cycle it, create X 1/1 pilots that basically have the whole pilot thing, right? I mean, they saddle mounts because I guess that's a 2024 version of pilots, but I mean, for this deck, it doesn't matter. They have the whole pilot thing. So it's pretty good. If like we hardcast it, great. We can cycle it, put it into our graveyard, and then reanimate it later with something like tune-up. Even better. Voyager Glidecar, I really like the idea of, especially as like a turn 1 play. When it enters the battlefield, scry 1. Great. Tap 3 other untapped creatures you control. Until end of turn, this vehicle becomes an artifact creature and gains flying, and put a 1/1 counter on it. So I like the idea of this just because it's like, it's not like a mana sink, but it's like an artifact sink. Like we can like tap down like as many artifacts as we can to just put a bunch of 1/1 counters on it. Which is really, really good. So it's like, oh yeah, like we didn't attack, or like our things have vigilance with Kotori. So it's like we just tap down a bunch of things and make this infinitely bigger. Like we're probably not attacking with it as a 2/2, right? But when it's like a 6/6, like for sure we'll attack with it, or a 6/7. Weatherlight, really good. Flying 4/5. When it does combat damage to a player, look at the top 5 cards of your deck. You may reveal a historic card, put it into our hand. Easy, rest on the bottom. Going into enchantments, I think it's just these. Rhystic Study, whenever an opponent plays a spell, we may draw a card unless they pay 1. It either taxes them or it gets us card advantage. Win-win. Smothering Tithe, same thing. Whenever they draw a card, they can pay 2. If they pay 2, great, it taxes them. Or we make an artifact, which is great, works with our artifact synergy, and it ramps us, which is even better. Thopter Spy Network, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control an artifact, make a 1/1 Thopter, and then whenever one of our artifact creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. It's just good card draw. We just make a dude every turn. We can use them to crew or whatever. Going into lands, it's really nothing too crazy. Academy Ruins is great because it puts target artifact card from our grave on top of our deck. Add a card waste. Like a lot of these are just, it's an untapped duel. Like that's the logic, is it's an untapped duel. Archwave Innovation can give the next spell Improvise, and again, we have a lot of artifacts, so pretty easy. Command Tower's an untapped duel. Country Roads, Take Me Home. It enters tapped unless we have a mount or a vehicle, which hopefully, like, we're either playing this like turn 1, which like we won't, or we're playing it like later, which ideally we will. And then we can pay 2 mana and sacrifice it to make a pilot, only as a sorcery, with the whole pilot text. Well, the new 2024 pilot text. Deserted Beach is mostly an untapped duel. Field of the Dead, you're probably wondering, man, why do you have this card? And it's because whenever it or another land enters the battlefield, if we control 7 or more lands with different names, which I think we have like 16 lands with different names in this deck, because we have a lot of non-basics, or a good amount for whatever, we make a 2/2. That 2/2 can now crew things that have crew 2. And all of our vehicles have crew 2, because Kotori says they have crew 2. So it's really whenever we have a land, we just make a crew machine. Like we just make a guy that crews, and he's a good blocker. Flood Farm Verge and Glacial Fortress, they're, again, same thing, untapped duels. Hollowed Fountain is an untapped duel. Every time when we need it to be, or if we don't need it to be, no big deal. Inventor's Fair gains us 1 life at the beginning of our upkeep if we have 3 or more artifacts, and then we can pay 4 mana to tap it and sacrifice it to search our deck for an artifact, reveal it, and put it into our hand. But we can only do it if we have 3 or more artifacts, and guys, we are an artifact deck, so that's pretty likely. Meg Hanger is just super sick. It taps for any color to cast a pilot or a vehicle, which is fine. And then we can pay 3 mana and tap it to make target vehicle just a creature until end of turn, which is really, really good. So now we don't have to crew. We just pay functionally 4. Reef Roads is the same thing as Country Roads, just blue. Reliquary Tower to give us no max hand size, because we do have a couple of those cards that do say, like, yeah, whenever you deal combat damage with this thing, draw a bunch of cards. Great. Sea of Clouds will almost always enter untapped, right? I build these decks with the idea that we have 3 opponents in a pod of 4. So it's either you have more than 2 opponents, which is fine, it enters untapped, or it's a 1v1 and you're at that point in the game where it entering tapped doesn't really matter. And then the final land, other than basics, we have Spire of Industry. Just taps for our colors, pay 1 life, tap it for any color, activate it only if we have an artifact. Guess what? We will. And then the final 2 lands, or quote-unquote 2 lands, the final 19 lands are just 10 islands and 9 plains. We're pretty evenly split among the color. I think it's like literally like 40% islands and like a lower 40% plains. But we have so many duels, it doesn't really matter. And plus all the vehicles, at least most of them are colorless. So we're fine on all that. That's all I got for you guys. Thank you guys for watching. Get the cards you need from the link right down below, and as always, like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys next time.